Hellraiser, the flesh is forever. Today, I'm bringing you an unmade Hellraiser script. This one, interestingly enough, is actually a direct follow-up to Hellraiser Judgment, written by Josiah M. Jones. We centre the story around Elizabeth. Elizabeth's family is murdered at the hands of Elliot Spencer, once known as Pinhead, which awakens her to her destiny and fuels her vengeance in an ultimate showdown with the renegade forces of Hell. Now, as said, this is a direct follow-up to Hellraiser Judgment, so Elliot Spencer is no longer Pinhead or a Cenobite in this version of Hellraiser. So, join me on this journey of the flesh is forever. As a foreword and overview by the writer himself, Hellraiser The Flesh is Forever serves as a reboot and sequel to the popular film franchise of its namesake. Elliot Spencer, now banished from Hell and no longer the Hell Priest, has devised a way to conquer Hell and take Leviathan's throne. In order to do so, he must obtain all 5 Lament configuration and shed Hell's royal blood on the day of the Lament alignment or configuration, a solar eclipse and planetary alignment that allows a transfer or reaffirmation of power in Hell. So, an interesting concept and an interesting way to reboot the franchise. However, unfortunately, this is a movie which is incredibly unlikely to be made, considering David S. Goyer is now writing a Hellraiser remake. So Act 1. The story opens with Elliot Spencer, now human and banished from Hell. He returns to that fateful spot, the officer's Quonset hut, where he first opened the Lament configuration, and where he became the Hell Priest, aka Pinhead. He seeks entry back into Hell, but is denied for his crimes against the throne of Leviathan. His rejection leaves him with only one option: to make everyone suffer. Time passes, and we find it's just a couple of days before Christmas. Elizabeth Mack, our main character, is performing with a symphonic troupe at an arts centre in celebration of the coming holidays. Dahlia, her mother, and Justice, her brother, have come to watch her perform. She plays well enough, but it isn't until her love interest and fellow cellist, Tony, inspires her to play better. And we see that Justice, her younger brother, has a knack for playing with puzzle-type toys, as he fidgets, playing with one in the audience. After the performance, they all meet in a banquet room for a reception with cocktails. Dahlia is elated with Elizabeth, although she is self-deprecating as usual. Tony joins them, but Dahlia has to get home and put Justice to bed. Not before reminding Elizabeth that she is supposed to come over tomorrow for dinner. After she goes, we learn that Elizabeth and Tony have a romantic history. That Elizabeth seems to have ended because she is still figuring herself out. All of a sudden, a violent brawl erupts amongst this posh group of music enthusiasts. The violence separates Elizabeth and Tony and gives Merchant, the eternal vagabond, the opportunity to grab Elizabeth. He demands she goes with him. She struggles against his inhuman grip on her wrist, and Tony shoves his way through the violent chaos to help her. Before he can reach her, though, Elizabeth breaks away and runs. Tony reaches Merchant and confronts him. Merchant reveals his demonic demeanour by showcasing the pulsating veins through his face and razor-like teeth. Tony backs off, and Merchant leaves. We find Elizabeth in her car, very upset, driving home. It would seem the violence has spread to the streets. Elizabeth watches this enigma with bewilderment. What is going on? She finally makes it home to her apartment, and we see the film, and book nerd that she is, notably a huge fan of It's a Wonderful Life. Tony has already called several times and texted to check on her. She doesn't return his calls. In order to relax and forget all about it, Elizabeth goes into her room and pulls out a contraption of her own making. 4 cello strings, looped and fashioned with small wooden handles. She removes her clothes, and we see her beautiful body is riddled with self-inflicted scars. She sets the metronome on her nightstand to 60 beats per minute and slides her leg into the loop of the strings. She begins to soar. She bites her lip in pleasure as she cuts into her own flesh, in rhythm with a metronome. Merchant is nude and flagellating himself in rhythm with Elizabeth, before the lament configuration, which rests upon an altar of flesh and bone in a dirty shack somewhere that Merchant lives. Back at Elizabeth's apartment, she doesn't notice the wall across from her. It moves. Something is behind it and watching, wanting in. The wall begins to stretch, like thin rubber, towards her as Hecate tries to push into Elizabeth's world. She pushes and paws against the elasticity of the wall. Merchant beats himself harder as the cat-o'-nine cords rip into his flesh. His eyes turn white, and the box communicates with him as the multiple shared visions between he and Elizabeth begin. With a glimpse into the ancient past, we see a red desert that is burning hot under a coming solar eclipse. Aligned underneath it is a large obsidian pyramid. This is the liminal pyramid. Inside its chambers, Samael, a black effigy of Jesus Christ, has been crucified to the floor. He is surrounded by 4 archons of Leviathan. Their robes are patterned after the designs of the lament configuration, and they all are holding black cubes, the Black Laments. In another vision, updated archons of Leviathan have led a home invasion. They have a pregnant woman hostage, and a rookie officer, Donald Mack, is on the scene. They murder the woman by stabbing her in the stomach multiple times, and Donald shoots the archons. Next, we find ourselves in the bedroom of a young Donald and Dahlia Mack. The room is astral. Stars beam on the ceilings along with comets and other celestial bodies. They make love like lions, intensely, viciously and lovingly. Donald's eyes begin to burn a bright blue as Dahlia's turn red and do the same. The light emanates like smoke and wafts through the night's air. Gold light bursts in between them and settles in Dahlia's womb. Elizabeth awakes from the visions, nightmares, her eyes white like Merchant's. For only a split second, she rubs them, gains her composure and settles back into reality. She stops the still beating metronome. Everything appears normal. The wall is intact and there is no Hecate or trace of her presence. The night has passed. Elizabeth gets out of bed to get ready for the day. Morning, news reporters, they're talking about the strange occurrences of mass violence, the erratic weather, and the coming eclipse that is happening Christmas Day. Dahlia calls Elizabeth. She needs Elizabeth to grab some sweet potatoes from the store so she can make her pies. Elizabeth agrees as she needs to pick up some food for her pet snake. During the conversation, we see at the Mack home, Donald has been drinking eggnog and is full of merriment in preparation for the festivities. Also, Justice has found something in the attic. The lament configuration. Enter the Spahn Temple, the lair of Elliot Spencer. It's a sadist architect's magnum opus, a subterranean warehouse dungeon where a rave of blood, sex, magic, and torture prevail. Deranged cultists who follow Spencer engage in a dance of flesh desecration, all overseen by the archons of Leviathan and Spencer, who watches from a second-tier balcony. The auditor makes his way through the various scenes of pleasure and pain until he reaches Spencer. He advises that it is time. Spencer reflects on maggots, their yearnings and his divine proclivities. The auditor mentions his loyalty, and they discuss Spencer's conquest to take Hell's throne. After Spencer addresses the cultists and ensures them of their rewards for their faith in him, he pronounces that now is the time. And we flash to Elizabeth waiting in line at the local hypermart, your one-stop shop for everything. She has the sweet potatoes and waits patiently as an old lady counts out her coupons. She realizes she's forgotten the snake food. She makes her way to the pet supply aisle when the lights begin to flicker and the fish aquariums begin to boil. The old lady from the checkout line appears. She begins shouting at Elizabeth and hailing her. The old lady begins to rip into her skin as her bones twist and contort. Finally, her chest bursts open, showering the aisle with blood. There stands Hecate, Elizabeth is scared and in awe. Hecate warns her of the coming configuration and instructs her to find what seeks her. Elizabeth is broken from her trance by an employee trying to help her. Everything is normal, and again, there is no Hecate around. Still, the event has frightened Elizabeth. She drops the sweet potatoes and she runs from the store. As she does so, another brawl has broken out, and violence rips through the store amongst the shoppers. Once outdoors, Elizabeth finds the weather has gone crazy. Torrential rain and heavy winds has everyone scrambling. Once in her car, Elizabeth is encircled by crazed shoppers. They all have sinister looks in their eyes and nosebleeds. Terrified, Elizabeth squeals out of the parking lot as Tony calls. Looking at her phone, she almost gets hit by an oncoming truck. She stops by the side of the road and hears Hecate's words echoing to her about finding what seeks her. Donald is slipping into a manic state. He has moved from simply drinking eggnog to carrying around a bottle of rum. He stares at a blank television screen, blood trickles from his nose. The doorbell rings. It's Elizabeth. She's crying, soaked by the rain and distraught. Donald snaps out of his strange state and tries consoling her. Dahlia walks in and does the same. They convince Elizabeth to go upstairs and change into some of Dahlia's dry pajamas. They give one another familiar, worried looks. A little later, Dahlia has finished setting the table for her Christmas feast. Donald comes in, drunk and agitated. He dumps more rum into the eggnog bowl, and Elizabeth enters, dressed and dry, sulking and detached. Dahlia calls for Justice to come eat, who comes running in. Donald pours himself and Elizabeth some eggnog. Elizabeth expresses her distaste for it, but Donald is adamant about her drinking it. It is the festive season. He insists it will calm her nerves. Dahlia tries to soothe the tension with talk of the crazy weather, and Donald suggests it's because it's the end of the world. Dahlia suggests Donald should say grace, which seems to lighten the mood. He does, and then digs into the food, but notices Elizabeth just picking at it. This irritates him, so he begins to chastise her as she digs into her leg with a fork under the table. He expresses his frustration with her and how she always has some issues going on that he and Dahlia have to clean up. Dahlia snaps at Donald. She lets him know that he is unfairly taking out his own issues with regard to shooting the Archons all those years ago on Elizabeth. Elizabeth finally goes to drink her eggnog, but Donald snatches the glass and throws it across the room, shattering it against the wall. Elizabeth quietly cries, and Dahlia stares at him, unimpressed, while slow clapping for his rage and immaturity. Donald quickly loses steam and apologizes. He expresses how the killings and murder seen from back then still eats at him today, especially around Christmas. Breaking the silence, Justice holds up the lament configuration. He tells Elizabeth the lady in the attic says this is what seeks her. Everyone is dumbstruck, as they didn't know Justice could speak. They all stare at him, unsure of how to respond. Suddenly, there is a crash and sound of forceful entry into the living room. Donald tells everyone to stay in the dining area while he investigates. Entering the living room, Donald finds the Auditor and two Archons with guns. He is frozen, but immediately recognizes the Archons. He screams for his family to run and tries to flee himself, but is stopped in his tracks as they are all led into the living room from the dining area by two more Archons. The Auditor compliments their home and invites them to take a seat, so they may have a brief conversation. Spencer enters and tells them to kneel. Donald and Dahlia are bound before Elizabeth and Justice. He tells them he wants the box, and he knows that she left it there. The Macs have no idea of who she is or what box he is talking about. Then Elizabeth realizes what he wants. She tells Justice to give it to him, but he says he's not supposed to. Impatiently, Spencer gives the Auditor the signal. The Auditor removes a bone saw from his medical bag and proceeds to decapitate Donald. Elizabeth, shocked in horror, tries to divert her eyes, but Spencer tells her to watch, or the boy is next. She watches as the Auditor saws off her father's head and holds it up for all to see. Dahlia screams and is hysterical. An Archon grabs Justice. They exit to retrieve the box. Spencer watches with amusement as Dahlia, still bound, struggles to get to her feet. Finally she does, and rages towards Spencer. He catches her by the face and tells her to consider his acknowledgement a blessing. He then pulls out a large hunting knife, sticks it in her mouth, and slices up her cheek. She falls to the ground, right as Justice returns. Spencer tells him, "Watch." He pounces on Dahlia and repeatedly stabs her. His stoic nature dissolves into animalistic savagery. The stabs are so hard and deep that the knife begins to thud against the wood of the floor. Elizabeth covers her ears but continues to watch Spencer slaughter her mother. Spencer gets up and shouts for Justice to bring him the box. Justice hands it over. Spencer immediately turns to leave, but not before telling the Archons to grab Justice, as he needs him. Elizabeth realizes they're taking Justice and awakes from her devastation. She yells for them to stop. Spencer turns. He stares at her with recognition and tells her she's not worthy to be a witness. The Auditor motions towards her with the bone saw. Spencer stops him. The Auditor questions his judgment and is given a look that could kill. He acquiesces submissively, and then Spencer leaves. Elizabeth tries to chase after him, but is hit by an Archon. The Auditor looks down at her, and he turns on the television for her to keep her company. It's a Wonderful Life is on. He tells her that Spencer should have killed her, and then he knocks her out. Act 2. The visions continue, and occur in quick glimpses mixed with blackness. Back inside the liminal pyramid, Hellel enters. She's dressed like the other Archons, but her face isn't revealed. She carries a large, black, multifaceted diamond. The Black Lament diamond. It's long and daggeresque. She kneels beside Samael and cuts into his chest with it. He weeps with a smile. She then rubs her fingers in the blood over the diamond. It begins to configure, just like the puzzle box, into a cube. The Black Lament. It opens. She removes his heart and places it inside the box. She closes it and places it into his chest cavity. Barbed wire-like tendons spill out from the Black Lament into Samael's body. His eyes turn black as his flesh begins to twist and contort. He gasps as the eclipse has reached totality and a burst of dark, cosmic energy shoots down from the sun and into the pyramid. Elizabeth awakes. It's a Wonderful Life is still on, and Tony is calling on the phone. She manages to stand, wobbly. She walks towards the dining area. She slips in her parents' blood and falls over Dahlia's corpse. She gets up and exits. She walks back in with a bottle of rum and just stares, completely lost. She chugs the bottle more and more and more. She starts to hyperventilate as her reality is now hell. She sobs, screams, and is completely hysterical. She drops to her knees before her parents' corpses. She notices the broken glass from the cup of eggnog from earlier. She grabs a large shard and digs it into her arm. She slowly drags it from her shoulder to her elbow. Her cries subside as this calms her. The phone, ringing, finally stops. The movie catches her attention. She lumbers over to the couch, bottle in hand, and plops down, devoid of thought and emotion. Empty. Later, reality has become unreal. She watches the movie while drinking with an air of horrific surrealty. She notices the blood on the floor begins to pool together. It soaks into the floor as if the house were drinking it. On the television, It's a Wonderful Life is interrupted by a test of the National Emergency Broadcast System. A loud ring blares from the television. Its pitch begins to shift up and down, then becomes static as the screen jumps to a technical difficulties please stand by placeholder, accompanied by warped hold music. From the pool of blood, a skeletal arm lunges out. It grabs the solid floor and pulls the rest of itself out. As it does, the skeletal creature soaks up the blood as tendons and muscle fibers attach and grow upon the bones. This is Kirsty Cotton. Elizabeth watches with wide eyes but doesn't move. She takes another drink, shaking. Kirsty manages to grab Donald's corpse and pulls herself all the way out of the bloody pool. She is a skinless monstrosity and immediately begins feasting on Donald's dead body like a wild carrion predator. Elizabeth turns off the television with the remote. There's silence in the room. Kirsty sits up, still skinless but more whole. Elizabeth, realizing what's happened, finally freaks out. She screams and throws the bottle, hitting Kirsty in the face and knocking her back. Elizabeth jumps up to run. Kirsty grabs her by the ankle and trips her. Elizabeth fights back with kicking and screaming as this ghoul attempts to hold her back. Elizabeth manages to free herself. She jumps up and runs for the door. Kirsty is right behind her. Elizabeth turns and gives her a solid right hook. Elizabeth is almost out the door when Kirsty stops her with knowledge about Spencer. She asks if he did this to her and if he took the box. Elizabeth calms and stops to listen to what she has to say. Kirsty takes her into the attic and tells Elizabeth about how this was once her house and that she died here, opening the box years ago, in hopes of making a deal with the Cenobites and saving her father from hell. She searches and discovers old paintings of Spencer as Pinhead that had been left behind after the house was sold. Elizabeth recognizes him and breaks down over his taking justice. Kirsty vows to help Elizabeth get her brother back. Elizabeth then confides in Kirsty that he isn't her brother, but is actually her son. Her parents have been raising him since Elizabeth has some issues she's still figuring out. Kirsty assures Elizabeth she wants to help her get justice back, but first, she needs Elizabeth's help. Kirsty tells her that she still needs to feed. Aghast, Elizabeth rejects her, but Kirsty seductively convinces Elizabeth. She decides that it's time to call Tony back. She does, and he is now on his way. At the Sparn Temple, Spencer reflects on the time he wasted serving the meat that beckoned him through the box as if he were a servant. If he had only known then what he knows now, he would have already remade the world in his image. He is suspended by chains over cultists as he laments and pines for the lost time. We learn the fifth box still eludes him, but he has a plan in place to retrieve it. We also find Justice has been shackled to a wall with an Archon standing guard over him, tormenting him, naturally. Kirsty has cleaned up the massacre and dimmed the home. Elizabeth is beside herself with doubt and fear. She doesn't think she can do this. Kirsty, hiding in the shadows, reminds her that if she doesn't, Justice will certainly die. The doorbell then rings. Tony enters and notes how people are going crazy out there, along with the weather. He begins to question Elizabeth about what is going on. She slowly lures him in. Before Kirsty takes him, Elizabeth shoves him down on the couch. She wants him first. She forces herself on him and lets go. Tony doesn't mind. It's everything he ever wanted. She becomes ferocious and animalistic. The sex is wild. But mid-coitus, Kirsty grabs Tony from the back, sinking her fingers in him like warm butter. She feeds and siphons everything from him, leaving him a deflated shell. Elizabeth just watches. Kirsty immediately wants more and starts begging Elizabeth to help her find more people to kill. Elizabeth again rejects her, calling her sick. Kirsty says Elizabeth is just like her and shouldn't be a hypocrite. Elizabeth goes to run out the door to find Justice. A large hand grabs her by the face. Merchant's hand. The visions begin once more. Flashing, quickly, the dark, cosmic energy is still flowing into the pyramid. The Archons of Leviathan still surround Samael and Hillel. Their black laments open as hooked chains and fire shoot out from them. The Archons are engulfed and writhe sensually in the flames as their flesh is torn into by the hooks. The liminal pyramid burns. Elizabeth looks directly at Merchant and then faints. Kirsty immediately recognizes him and says she's not going back. He tells her they're all going to go back, and if she runs, he will catch her. She tells him her only intentions are to help Elizabeth save Justice. Satisfied with this, Merchant and Kirsty carry Elizabeth to the couch. Merchant stares awkwardly at Kirsty. She says she's going to go upstairs and find something to cover up. Elizabeth begins to wake. She is immediately frightened. Merchant assures her that he won't hurt her. He tries explaining to her that he is the keeper of the boxes. that Spencer is going to destroy the balance between heaven and hell and usher in the apocalypse. That there is a coming war in hell and that she is the key to it all. Elizabeth isn't buying it and still doesn't understand what is happening. Merchant, exacerbated, places his hand on her head, giving her another glimpse into the past. Merchant narrates. She sees Philip Le Marchand at an archaeological dig back in the 17th century. A local boy working the site finds an ancient relic, the Black Lament. He excitedly brings it to Philip, who has found exactly what he is looking for. We learn Le Marchand was actually a clockmaker. We find him fast at work, recreating the Black Lament into what will become known as the Lament configuration. We also learn that he is heavy into black magic. We enter the cellar, where he has flayed the boy, and he is hanging by chains, still alive. Le Marchand opens the boy's neck up with a knife and fills the box with his blood. It begins to configure. The door to hell is open, and Hecate appears. She instructs him to make more. We then see him make 4 more boxes, killing people to fill them with blood and presenting them to Hecate. He then begs for her to take him, but she curses him and his bloodline to be the keepers of the boxes. Elizabeth listens to Merchant's tale, but isn't convinced, nor does she care. She doesn't want to be his chosen one. She just wants to find justice. Kirsty enters, wrapped in a gauze, a la Hellraiser 2, and carrying a shotgun. Merchant tells her she won't need it. She racks it and tells him to speak for himself. Merchant continues to try and convince Elizabeth to open the box. He pulls out his. It's the very first one Philippe ever created. Elizabeth finally gives in after he convinces her the only way to defeat Spencer is with aid from the Order of the Gash, and those in hell still loyal to Leviathan. She tries to open it, but simply can't do it. Kirsty takes the box and insists that she tries. Success! The walls begin to crack open, and the hell bell tolls. The box calls forth the original Cenobites, the female Cenobite, Chatterer, and Butterball. The female asks if Elizabeth is ready, but Merchant advises that she remembers nothing of her past and who she is. She then senses Kirsty's presence. Immediately, Kirsty fires the shotgun at the female Cenobite, but hits Merchant. A chain flies at Kirsty, but she is already out the door with the last puzzle box. Merchant is wounded, but not dead. In fact, the wound has already begun to heal. He tells Elizabeth to go with the Cenobites, and he will chase after Kirsty. Elizabeth is confused and doesn't know what to do. The female Cenobite advises that Spencer has known Kirsty Cotton in ways we couldn't fathom, that she is his slave, mind, body, and soul. Surely she is taking him the last box, and there is no more time. Elizabeth agrees to return to hell with the Order of the Gash, and this dark fairy tale begins. Kirsty, wrapped up like a mummy, is running down the streets with the shotgun and puzzle box. The streets have turned to chaos as the apocalypse appears to be imminent. 4 thugs try to encircle and harm her. She doesn't hesitate and quickly shoots them down. She approaches the last one and feeds on him, restoring herself to the devilish beauty she is. Elizabeth and the Cenobites have entered Leviathan's labyrinth. Hovering above it reveals a gigantic black maze that seems to defy logic and physics. They walk through the dark corridors as the female Cenobite asks Elizabeth if any of it seems familiar. They come to an edge and stop. Elizabeth bumps right into Chatterer. He turns so she can pass him and see beyond. The maze crumbles and drops off into the abyss. He places his hand on her shoulder to support her and keep her from falling. Stretching into infinity is the void, yet in its center spins Leviathan. A monumentally huge black multifaceted diamond spinning on its own axis, unsupported by any physical means, as it reigns above all hell. Elizabeth asks if it's all just a dream. The female Cenobite tells her no and calls her Hellel as she instructs her to witness her birthright. They must move on, so they go back to take another corridor. As they move on, they hear a malicious noise. They all turn from where they came. An engineer demon, a multiple-limbed hell-flesh abomination, grips the sides of the walls with its clawed hands and feet. Its eyes bulge from its head as its foot-long, razor-sharp teeth are bathed as it salivates. Another half-dozen demons come barreling down the corridor. They run, but Chatterer stays behind. He fights them all to the gruesome death. He kills them all but two, and is ultimately feasted upon by the surviving creatures while the others escape. They exit the labyrinth. Elizabeth looks up to see the structure stretching endlessly upward. Elizabeth turns to witness hell. The black and wet landscape is biomechanical and insect-like, as cyclopean structures abound. It's an exercise in dark, sacred geometry and psychedelic damnation. Pillars of souls reach up into the eternal night and stretch down into the darkest depths of the pit, which descends before them into oblivion. The pillars spin like cyclones as the souls of the damned scream in agony and torment, writhing in their suffering. They speak of suffering and how it is their mercy to those who seek hell. The female Cenobite goes on about Spencer and how his plan will see all cast into the pit. Elizabeth is anxious to finish what needs to be done here and save justice. There is a temporal shift as the landscape changes and morphs as they pass through time and space instantaneously. Before them stands the Black Vatican, a massive perversion and dark reflection of its namesake. Directly above it, the Leviathan diamond hovers and spins. Upon closer inspection, the structure appears to be made of flesh and bone. It's wet and pulsates as blood flows through its construction. The gigantic doors open with a loud, scraping grind, announcing anyone's entry. The cathedral is grotesquely beautiful, damned architecture created by the greatest of Hell's visionaries. As Elizabeth walks in, hundreds of Cenobites fill the space. Among them are dozens of various types of pinheads and other Cenobites seen and known throughout the franchise's history. The dark surrealism engulfs Elizabeth. Time and space move different here. Elizabeth stops, but the female Cenobite urges her forward. She makes her way down the aisle towards the empty throne of hell. Mounted above it is an enormous structure, the rotting and desecrated head of Jesus Christ with goat horns. The eyes are a hollow black, and from its mouth chains dangle like thrown-up tentacles. Hecate presents herself to Elizabeth. She tells her how they've waited so long for her to return, how they have all suffered in her absence, but it was he who has suffered the most. She then takes her hand and kneels before her. The rest of the Cenobites kneel as well. The eyes of the Christ head structure begin to glow blue. The light emitted wafts like smoke into the air. The chains begin to drip and then pour blood onto the throne. As Elizabeth watches, her eyes take on a light red hue and emit a faint, similar smokiness, connecting with what's happening. From the pool of blood on the throne, an intact yet withered arm reaches out, and then another. An elderly Leviathan pulls itself out and is born into this old, deceased body that looks like the structure above it. A leprous, decrepit, white Jesus, complete with the horns but minus the chains hanging from his mouth. He stands up, covered in blood and nude. He limps towards Elizabeth. He calls to Elizabeth as his love. Elizabeth is wide-eyed. She starts to chuckle at the abomination. Then she starts laughing. The laughter becomes a violent mockery, hard, angry, and in the face of Leviathan. Her rage is let loose through this laughter. It turns into a fury of screaming as she becomes imbued with a force we haven't seen in her. It shakes Hell's very foundations, which causes the stained glass windows to explode. She turns and runs from it all. We cut to a 1970s journalist's office. Keystrokes from an old black typewriter fill the air, along with smoke from the endless cigarettes the auditor has been chain-smoking. The auditor is hard at work on his documentation of Hell's schism. Kirsty is shoved in the room by an Archon. The auditor immediately asks for the box. Kirsty hands it over and is only interested in seeing Spencer. The auditor gives her a cigarette as they must wait. They chat about the difficulties of their days. Spencer is sitting in front of Justice, studying him. He decides to tell him a story. He speaks of empires and power, how he aligned himself with what he thought was power, but soon learned it was all a charade. This is the reasoning behind his ambitions. He discovered Leviathan was a false source of power, and the true power came from her, which is why he did what he did. An Archon informs him that Kirsty has arrived with the box, and then Spencer lets Justice know that he will cut his throat soon, as his blood is the key to unlocking the real power. Elizabeth is lost in hell. She has come upon a new and twisted landscape. She slows to catch her breath as hell breathes around her. She notices what looks like a normal door. She runs for it and goes through. It's her family's home. Everything is normal once more, like the tragedy never occurred. Dahlia enters, asking where her sweet potatoes are. Elizabeth is now convinced that this isn't real. Dahlia gets worried and calls for Donald. He enters. His head has been crudely stitched back on, and his body is covered in lesions and bite marks from Kirsty. Dahlia grabs Elizabeth from behind, her face mutilated from the stabbings. Elizabeth breaks free and runs out the door she came in. Elizabeth immediately finds herself in an infinitely white room. Soft cello music plays. There, she sees herself nude and playing the cello. The strings from the bow and cello are veins and tendons from the doppelganger's own body. It pays her no attention and plays erotically. Blood starts to splash as the strings collide more violently, as the music intensifies. Elizabeth walks slowly around herself. Black ooze starts to spill from its mouth, as its flesh starts to decompose at an accelerated rate. It cracks and crumbles as the cello bursts into flames. Elizabeth turns. Leviathan stands before her. He lets out a terrible howl and charges forward. Elizabeth doesn't have time to scream. She closes her eyes and shields herself. In the last visions, she sees it all. The pyramid, the eclipse, the cutting into Samael, my flesh of my flesh, the boxes opening on the Archons, the unleashed fire, the beam of energy shooting down into the pyramid, hell and all its recent revelations. In the liminal pyramid, Hellel lifts her hood and removes her robes. She is Elizabeth as well as the divine, primordial Cenobite. Her skin twisted and scarred with metal implants, hooks and razors. She straddles Samael. They embrace as the pyramid is consumed by hell fire. Elizabeth snaps out of the visions and remembers everything. The decrepit Leviathan reveals himself as Samael. He looks as before, yet more infinite and fractal-like. Within his pores, a kingly Cenobite of divine origins. He reveals to her Spencer's betrayal, how he killed her and kept her trapped in an endless cycle of human rebirth and ignorance. She goes to embrace him, but he dissolves into a dark aura that encapsulates her, returning to her and giving her full power. She is lifted into the air by the darkness. Slices appear spontaneously across her face, leaving a grid-like crisscross pattern of wounds. From the ether, nails pound into each cross-section of the cuts, and she gives a sick grin and licks her lips as this occurs. The transformation is like that of a dark Cinderella. Cello strings wrap and twist their way around her neck, arms and thighs, permanently embedding and threading into her flesh. Her back explodes with chains and spiked balls at their ends. Morning stars. They flow through the air around her like long hair underwater. She is clad in skin-tight black latex and leather that becomes more so her skin than clothing. She falls, landing on her feet. Elizabeth has been reborn as Hellel, Queen of Hell, and the true Leviathan, Pinhead. Act 3. Spencer bursts into the auditor's office. He is all business and wants the last puzzle box. Kirsty is taken aback. She gets up and approaches him. The auditor removes the puzzle box from his desk drawer. She touches his face and rubs her hand down his cheek, becoming lost in his human features. Spencer praises her good work. She says how it all worked out just like he said it would. His plan was laid out perfectly. She kisses him. We see their connection has become something deeper than it ever has been before. Spencer pounds on the door and has an Archon remove her. He assures her that they'll have time together later. The auditor suggests that due to their entanglement, he believes Kirsty is now just like Spencer and seeks power. Spencer scoffs at the notion and tells the auditor that she was simply a part of his plan and nothing more than meat. The auditor is not convinced, and Spencer becomes angry. He puts the auditor in his place and storms out of the office. There's now a wedge between the two. Spencer stomps into his private quarters. He stops and looks at himself in the mirror. He stares for a moment and then spits on his reflection. He then sits on the bed, collecting himself. He kneels down and pulls out an old trunk from underneath the bed. He opens it and pulls out a few possessions he has come across since his time being human once more. An old copy of Macbeth, an old photo from when he was a young soldier, and some military medals. He takes it all in slowly. He then pulls out a chain with a hook at the end of it. Finally, he pulls out a large single pin. One of his pins. He holds it up and stares at it. There's a pounding. He shoves everything back into the trunk. Kirsty is brought in by the Archon. She and Spencer embrace. She tells him to do what he wants with her. He tells her to take it off. She starts to unwrap the gauze. He hands her a straight razor and tells her to take it all off. Moments later, Kirsty is on top of Spencer. She is covered in blood and slices. She carves into her flesh with the razor as she and Spencer have sex. Blood drips all over Spencer as she cuts herself in ecstasy. Hands burst through the blood-soaked mattress and grab Spencer. A skinless face pulls itself out from the blood close to Spencer's ear. Jesus wept. Kirsty swipes the razor across his throat and blood pours from the open gash. Spencer awakes in a sweat from the nightmare. He shakes it off and sits up. He looks over at Kirsty still sleeping next to him. He gets up and exits. Kirsty opens her eyes, wide awake. Spencer enters Merchant's cell. He has been captured and is being held in the filthiest of conditions. Spencer talks of their past and how Merchant should join him. Merchant rejects him and says Hellel is coming to kill him. Spencer grows angry and speaks of loyalty and how his plan will see even a god obey. Merchant, of course, wants no part of it. Spencer decides that it's time for the Last Supper. Kirsty finds Justice sleeping, yet still shackled to the wall. She wakes him and asks if he's hungry. She tells him that she's Elizabeth's friend and is going to take care of him. He asks about Spencer, but she says not to worry about him. She dangles the keys and unlocks his chains because it's time to eat. The hall has fallen silent. No moans of agony from the cultists. The fires from the torches flicker and the shadows dance around as Spencer stares at something, unseen just yet. The auditor approaches to see Merchant crucified upon banquet tables shaped like a cross, yet reminiscent of Da Vinci's Last Supper. He has been skinned and disemboweled, but lives, extremely weak. He barely moves with his eyes white and the demonic veins pulsating all over his flayed body. The auditor walks past Spencer, says nothing. Already seated at the table are Kirsty, Justice, and the Archons. The auditor takes his seat, grumbling to himself in disapproval. Spencer approaches and exchanges sultry glances with Kirsty as he walks around the table. As he makes his way, it's revealed that all of the cultists have been slaughtered in a variety of horrific ways. Their bodies have been hung by chains, left mutilated in cages, and lay piled up in large mounds. A sadistic holocaust and mockery of Christ's last hours. Spencer stands at the centre of the table, admiring his work. The lament configuration rests at the centrepiece above Merchant's head. 2 large bowls of Merchant's entrails and an empty chalice and a large knife rest before him. He passes the bowls to each side and picks up the puzzle box. Spencer mocks the Catholic rite of communion with the entrails, which the Archons feast on, and his speech. He begins to peel the golden foil ornamentation from it, revealing it as Lemarchand's Black Lament. The auditor fidgets as if annoyed by the show. He grabs the knife and chalice and motions toward Justice. Spencer continues with his mockery. Fed up, the auditor stands and shouts, calling Spencer's pageantry childish blasphemies. Just then, Merchant unleashes a roar that startles them all. Kirsty takes the opportunity. She grabs the box and smacks Spencer in the temple with it. Justice scurries under the table. Kirsty tosses him the box and he runs. An Archon grabs Kirsty and slams her up against the wall by her throat. The Auditor and the other Archons are already scrambling after Justice. Kirsty lets Spencer know she's not afraid. He just stares at her, wounded by her treachery, but reminds her that they will have an eternity. He leaves her and goes after Justice. Justice frantically runs. He stops every now and again, panting, while rubbing his fingers and thumbs over the puzzle box. He can hear the footsteps and commotion of everyone after him. Justice continues running, finds another hiding spot, again and again. He finally sees a ventilation shaft and goes for it, all while trying to unlock the box. Not watching where he's going, he runs right into Spencer. Justice drops the black lament. Click. It starts to configure. Spencer grabs Justice and the box. Kirsty tries to help Merchant get up. She sees and hears the crackling of the walls and the hell bell tolling. She knows Justice was successful. The Auditor sees it too and knows it's too late. The Archons continue their search, unaware Spencer already has Justice. More desecrated bodies of cultists litter the area in horrific ways. A true slaughterhouse. The Archon gurgles as it makes its way around looking for Justice in the darkness. A ventilation fan still spins, making a rhythmic swooshing sound in the dark. Something jostles Spencer's chains. They clank together. The Archon turns and searches. Nothing there. The fan, clanking chains, and leftover silence make the air thick and tense. The Archon continues to creep while hunting its prey, but it's too late. The hunter has become the hunted, as a morning star chain flies through the air, bursting through the Archon's skull, and then retracts. The Archon falls over dead, with a hole punched through its skull that leaks what's left of its brain and blood. Another Archon comes running from the darkness, ready to attack, but nothing is there. It looks around and tries to see the best it can. 6 Morningstar chains fly out from the shadows, plunging into the Archon's body. It wails. The chains retract, tearing the Archon to shreds and sending blood and meat everywhere. Merchant tries to free his hands from the spikes nailed through his palms, but has only managed to free one. Kirsty turns to see the female Cenobite Butterball and Hecate entering. The female Cenobite immediately sends a chain flying at Kirsty that sinks right into her stomach. She drops to her knees. Merchant tells the female Cenobite to stop, as Kirsty is helping. The last 2 Archons enter. The Cenobites turn to face them in a deadly standoff. The Archons, having grabbed their assault rifles, go to fire them. Both Hecate and the female Cenobite send chains flying their way and knock the weapons from their hands. Butterball charges in, grabs one, and lifts him into the air. He opens his mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth that go down his throat. His jaw unhinges, and he begins to eat the Archon alive. It fights back, but it's no match for Butterball's strength. Blood and juices squirt out as he devours him. Hecate has already leaped through the air and grabbed the other by his face. Her head spins wildly, revealing all her faces as she digs her claws deeper and deeper into the Archon's skull, ultimately ripping its face off. Pus and ooze spill from its cavity. The Auditor is at his desk, smoking and shaking. The door to his office explodes. Wood and glass flies everywhere. Elizabeth, now Hellel, walks in slowly. She is a majestic abomination of pleasure and pain. The Auditor takes off his glasses and looks at her. He's stunned by her hellish beauty. Hellel questions him about his betrayal. The Auditor chalks it up to a lack of inspiration and the need to destroy in order to create. Hellel spots the medical bag and removes the bone saw. She tells him to kneel. The Auditor stares at her. He takes one last, hard drag off of his cigarette. He gets up, stands before her, and then kneels. Maliciously and fast, Hellel grabs the Auditor by his head and starts sawing into his neck. He chokes and gurgles as she brutally decapitates him. Blood sprays everywhere. She then throws his head on the ground and stomps on it repeatedly until her anger subsides. She then composes herself and slowly walks out. Merchant is up, and Kirsty is helping him along. The Cenobites watch as Hellel enters. She approaches and looks at Kirsty. She thanks Merchant and Kirsty for their help. She then instructs them all to leave, so she can handle Spencer alone. In the ritual room of the Sparn Temple, Spencer waits. The room is dome-shaped, like a crude planetarium. It is built to open, so the sky can be let in and the nearing eclipse can be seen. The sky is red as the celestial bodies burn the day like in the visions before. Spencer stands in the centre of the room and has Justice by the shoulders with his hunting knife to his throat. All 5 puzzle boxes spin in an orbit around them through their magic. A red and blue electrical current flows and pulsates between and through them. Hellel enters. Hellel demands Spencer return Justice to her. She tells him not to harm him. Spencer says if he harms him, he will become a god. The eclipse is at hand. Spencer goes to slice Justice's throat, and Hellel sends a chain flying his way. It hits his hand, but he still manages to cut Justice. His blood spills onto the boxes. The boxes then open, and chains fly out. Their hooks sink into his flesh. Hellel flies toward him, but is blown back by a flash of light. There is a rumbling as the sky turns a much darker red. Spencer stands there as energy surges through the chains into him. His eyes turn jet black, and he is consumed with madness and power. The ritual is incomplete, as Justice is still alive and crawling away. The chains fall limp, and Spencer is cut off from the newfound power. Frustrated and angry, he tears the chains from his flesh and moves toward Justice. Hellel flies to her feet and barrels into Spencer. He smacks her with a force that sends her flying back once more. He makes his way to Justice and picks him up. Suddenly, there is a plunging sound, and blood sprays from Justice's chest all over Spencer, from one of Hellel's chains. Justice's eyes widen and then fade into darkness. He's yanked back as the chains retract and pulled into her arms. Spencer laughs as he is covered in Justice's blood and has all he needs. Spencer wipes Justice's blood from his face and shows Hellel his hands now covered with it. He licks it from his fingers. Winds howl as black clouds roll in and blood rain begins to pour. Funnel clouds form and turn in the sky, swirling into black and red cyclones of death. The sky opens up and swirls like a vortex portal around the sun. So the eclipse, now in totality, remains seen. Red and blue lightning pulsates throughout the sky. Spencer raises his arms and the boxes begin to orbit him once more. They all begin to configure and change shape as they spin around him, eventually changing into diamonds, like the spinning Leviathan diamond hovering in hell. Spencer commands Hellel to give up as it's already over. She has lost. Hellel stands, ready to fight. He sends a configured diamond flying, a sharp, deadly projectile towards her. She dodges as it just misses her and sticks in a wall behind her. He then sends a second, which she blocks with one of her chains. He says he is sovereign and sends another diamond flying at her that pierces her right shoulder. She falls back, stunned. She grips it, rips it out, and charges forward. He sends the fourth configured diamond at her. It pierces her left thigh. She stumbles and falls, but manages to get up to a knee. He walks up to her with the configured black lament diamond in hand and looks down at her. I am hell. He raises the black lament diamond into the air as if to stab her. She looks up at him. Then have it. With a glance, Hellel sends chains flying at him. They plunge into Spencer from all around. His body and face are pierced, ripped, and spread in all directions, reminiscent of Frank Cotton's final moments from the first Hellraiser. A dark energy flows through them and into him as he screams. She sends all of Hell's suffering into him all at once. Spencer freezes, unable to move or speak, paralyzed. The black lament diamond falls from his grasp. She gets up, approaches him, and picks it up. Spencer watches her, but remains frozen. Tears start to fall from his eyes as he watches her intently. His weeping noticed, Hellel simply stares at him. The extreme weather starts to dissipate as Hellel continues to look at Spencer, and then smiles sadly at him. I forgive you. She then stabs him in the middle of his forehead with a black lament diamond. His eyes return to normal. His head rears back as a beam of dark cosmic energy shoots down from the eclipse and directly into the end of the black lament diamond. Spencer is filled with immense entropic power. He begins to shrivel and decompose into the long dead corpse he has been for decades. He then hardens and starts to crack like an ancient marble statue. Hellel watches him and then retracts all the chains that were already in him, shattering and scattering him to dust. There is nothing left of Elliot Spencer. The eclipse is now finished and Hellel walks away. She kneels before an unconscious Justice. She picks him up and slowly carries him off. And we close. 1 year later, we're back in the Mac home. It is decorated for the holidays once more, and they all have just finished eating Dahlia's Christmas feast. Donald is sitting back in his chair with his belly poked out. Elizabeth, Justice, and Dahlia are smiling and enjoying their time together. Dahlia walks out to grab some sweet potato pies from the kitchen. Donald has a brief heart-to-heart with Elizabeth and lets her know how proud of her he is. She makes fun at him for being cheesy. Dahlia comes back in and they all dig into the pies. Later, Elizabeth has Justice slung over her shoulder, fast asleep. Donald says his goodbyes. Dahlia stops Elizabeth and reiterates what Donald has just said. They love her, and they're extremely proud of who and what she is. They share a laugh about never watching It's a Wonderful Life ever again. Elizabeth leaves. Hellel stands on the porch to her parents' house, while the vast landscape of hell stretches to infinity before her. She looks down at Justice, who is no longer on her shoulder but beside her, now a dark prince of the underworld, and looks as such. He is handsomely dead, hellish royalty. Hellel and Justice make their way down the aisle of the Black Vatican. Hundreds of Cenobites kneel as they make their way. She approaches the throne and then sits up on it. Kirsty, now a dead, sexy Cenobite, steps out and stands to the left of the throne with Justice to the right. Hecate, the female Cenobite, and Butterball stand in the front row, looking up at her. Hellel holds up her left hand, and the black lament hovers over her palm. Hellel looks directly at us. I have such sights to show you. And then, interestingly enough, in this script, there is a post-credits sequence written, which is as follows. Rats and trash plague this black alley. Merchant, mostly healed up, stands by a flaming barrel of trash. He watches as Harry Dahmer, the broke occult private dick, approaches. He is covered in tattoos of strange esoteric symbols and wearing sunglasses. The fire explodes as Merchant becomes a giant winged demon with goat horns. He flies off into the night, and as he does, he drops the lament configuration into Harry's hands. Harry looks down at the puzzle box. He removes his glasses, revealing his blinded eyes, and then stares up at the sky where a glorious blood-red moon has filled up the night. Fuck me. Fade out. The end. Personally, I really like this script, in all honesty. There are some good twists and turns. It does somewhat play into the culture of, women overtaking franchises in this day and age, but generally speaking, I really did actually like this script. It flows nicely. It does have an air of Lovecraftian feel, and also very Clive Barker-esque, in fact, with an air of expansion to the Clive Barker world. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please do let me know down below in the comment section. If you stayed this long, well done. Congrats. This was a long video and took a really long time to make and also edit, so please do give it a like. Anyway guys, thanks so much for watching. I've Mr. H. Take care.